So we talked about the Pikes Peak Gold Rush and the first settlements yesterday, and I want to talk a little bit about the Larimer Party. So in November of 1858, General Williams Larimer was a land speculator from eastern Kansas, and he actually placed logs to stake a square-mile claim on the site of the St. Charles claim. And if you remember, that's one of the very first claims here in Colorado. And that was across the creek from the mining settlement of Auraria. The majority of settlers in St. Charles had returned to Kansas in the winter and only left a small number of people behind to guard their claim. So Larimer and his followers gave the representatives promises, and they threatened them, and the St. Charles claim was completely surrendered. So the name of the site was changed to Denver City after Kansas Territorial Governor James W. Denver, in an attempt to ensure that the city would become the county seat of then Arapahoe County, Kansas. So when Larimer named the city after Denver to curry favor with him, Denver had already resigned as governor and no longer had a say in naming the capital. So even after he was no longer governor, he still was able to get the name Denver to become the name of this new city. So Denver at first was a mining settlement where the gold prospectors panned gold from the sands of the Cherry Creek River and the South Platte River. So Larimer, along with associates in the Denver City Land Company, laid out roads parallel to the creek. Therefore, it was easier for people to get to that creek. They sold parcels to the town to merchants and to miners, with the intention of creating a major city that would cater to new immigrants. So really, they were trying to create this brand new city that people could come to and live at and live in. You live in a city, not at a city. So that you could, they could come here and live in this city and start to really grow it. So prospectors discovered that the gold deposits here in the streams in town were not good. They were pretty poor, and they were super duper quickly exhausted. So that means that they ran out of the gold. So when rich gold deposits were discovered in the mountains west of Denver, that was in early 1859. And it appeared that Denver City might just become a ghost town as these people started to move into the mountains and pan for gold there. But once the gold rush began, there was a great need for materials that couldn't be produced locally. So they were produced in Denver, and that assured that Denver's future as a supply hub for these new mines. So as these new mines started going up, that was when Denver became this place that was making the materials that the mines needed, which kept the people of Denver in business. So before the gold rush, trading was sparse in the Denver area. Early expeditions into the area, such as the Pike and Long expeditions, had returned east, referring to the plains as the Great American Desert. So what that is that there was not many people here. If you think about a desert and what we think about today, people don't really live in desert areas too often here in the U.S. We've started making them more cities, like we see down in Arizona, but at this time it was really hard to live in desert areas. So, but despite this, frontier posts and forts existed and traded with the natives and frontiersmen. However, the closest major trading route, the Oregon and Santa Fe trails, didn't come within 100 miles of the Denver area. So until a permanent trading route was established, the locals had to make do with what little extra new immigrants brought with them. So this was right before those railways came into play. So Auraria and Denver began to compete for business that could cater to new immigrants and for the domination of the area. So Auraria began to take the early lead with smithery and carpentry, But in May of 1959, Denver City actually donated 53 lots to Leavenworth and Pikes Peak Express in order to secure the region's first overland wagon route. So we wanted a route to come through Denver so that we could get immigrants coming in so that we could build our city. So we offered daily services for passengers, mail, freight, gold. So the express reached Denver on a trail that trimmed westward travel time to just as few as about 6 days. So being able to come through Denver cut off time for travelers. And with supplies being delivered to the Denver side of Cherry Creek, businesses began to move there as well. By June, Auraria had 250 buildings, and Denver at that time only had 150 buildings, and both cities were growing quickly. So with this growth came a need for a wider government. And that is how we get to the new territory, Colorado. So Denver, Auraria, and the land west of the Continental Divide were actually part of Arapahoe County, which encompassed the entire western portion of the Kansas Territory. So at that time, at the creation of Arapahoe County in 1855, that was actually occupied primarily by Cheyenne and Arapahoe Indians, with only few white settlers, and thus the county was never really organized. With no county government and the leaders of the Kansas City Territory kind of preoccupied with things that were going on in different parts of the Kansas Territory, there was little attention given to the Arapahoe County and where these Cheyenne and Arapahoe Indians were, even by the U.S. Congress, because they were actually preoccupied with different things going on between northern and southern states. So in addition, minefields were being moved beyond the borders of the Kansas Territory, and because of their importance and ties to mining activity closer to Denver, calls began for a new territory or a new state. On October 24th, 1859, an election was held to form a provisional government for the Goldfields, and the formation of the provisional government of the territory of Jefferson was approved. So the elected governor of the territory of Jefferson was Robert Williamson Steele, and he opened the first session of the Jefferson Territorial Legislature in Denver on November 7th, 1859. So this is a really, really big time for Colorado. So Colorado at this point is starting to be recognized a little bit more as its own sort of territory. The Congress embroiled in the debate over different things like slavery, and they failed to consider the new territory. So the election of Abraham Lincoln for president in the United States eliminated any chance for federal endorsement of the territory of Jefferson and any role in government or Governor Steele. He was a pro-Union Democrat and vocal opponent of Lincoln and the Republican Party. So at this point, there were some political things going on, and what that means is that at this time, all of that piece of making Colorado its own state was going to be put on hold. So that was not going to happen during this time. So it actually wasn't until February 28th of 1861 that U.S. President James Buchanan was actually outgoing, and he signed an act of Congress and organized the Free Territory of Colorado. President Abraham Lincoln appointed William Gilpin of Missouri the first governor of the Territory of Colorado, and he arrived in Denver City on May 29th of 1861. So that was really when the first governor came. Everything's kind of falling into place. And on June 6, 1861, Governor Steele issued a proclamation declaring the territory of Jefferson disbanded and urging all employees and residents to abide by laws governing the United States. So at this point, we're getting that closer and closer and closer and closer. The Colorado General Assembly first met on September 9th of 1861, and that's when they created the 17 counties for this new territory. And on November 1st, 1861, including a new Arapahoe County as well as Denver City as its seat. So that's when we finally got representation. The legislation approved the reincorporation of the cities of Denver, Auraria, and Highland as Denver City on November 7th, 1861, in order to better administer the quickly growing cities. So by this time, Denver is really starting to grow. People are coming through on the trade routes, and everything is really starting to fall in place for Denver. So Denver City served as the Arapahoe County seat from 1861 until it became its own county in 1902. In 1867, Denver City became the territorial capital. So that is when Denver became the capital city. With its newfound importance, Denver City shortened its name to just Denver. On August 1st, 1876, Denver became the temporary state capital when Colorado was admitted into the Union, and the statewide vote in 1881 made Denver the permanent state capital. So in 1876 is when Colorado went from being a territory of the United States to an actual state in the United States. We will talk about the 1860s tomorrow.